The planet Feralia was silent after the storm. The wind moved across the broken towers and burned fields. A human engineer named Evan Cole walked through the ruins, wearing his damaged helmet and dusty suit. His ship had crashed hours ago while helping with the rescue mission. He came here to find survivors, but the city looked dead. He checked his scanner again. It beeped weakly, showing a faint life signal ahead. The air was thick with smoke, and every step made the ground creak under his boots. Evan could smell burned metal and strange chemicals in the air. He was tired, hungry, and almost out of oxygen. But the signal kept blinking. Someone was alive. He climbed over a pile of broken glass and found a collapsed dome ahead. The structure looked like a nursery or school. Its walls were cracked, and a blue light flickered inside. Evan turned on his small wrist lamp and walked carefully through the entrance. "Hello?" He called out softly, his voice echoing in the empty hall. There was no answer, only a faint sound like quiet sobbing. He followed the sound until he reached a corner full of fallen beams and broken toys. There, hiding behind a shattered console, was a small alien child. Her skin was pale silver, her eyes glowing faint blue, and her tiny hands shook as she hugged her knees. She looked no older than 7. When she saw Evan, she froze, eyes wide with fear. Evan slowly raised his hands to show he meant no harm. Hey, it's okay," he said in a gentle tone. She didn't understand his words, but she watched his face carefully. Her breathing was fast, sharp, like someone trapped in panic. Evan knelt down and smiled through his cracked helmet visor. He pointed to himself. "Evan," he said, then pointed to her, trying to ask her name. The child stayed silent, trembling suddenly. A loud crack shook the ground. Part of the ceiling collapsed behind him. Dust filled the air. And the girl screamed. Evan rushed forward, covering her with his body as debris fell around them. When the shaking stopped, he coughed and checked her quickly. She was fine, just frightened, tears rolling down her cheeks. Evan took a slow breath and reached into his pocket. He found a small thing he always carried, a bubble toy he used to calm himself during stress missions. He pressed the button, and small shimmering bubbles floated into the smoky air. The girl blinked, watching them drift and reflect the dim light. Her crying stopped, replaced by quiet surprise. He smiled and made another bubble, letting it float near her face. For the first time, she reached out and touched one. It popped softly, making her gasp and then laugh, a light, musical sound that broke the silence of the ruined building. Evan chuckled quietly, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. He had no idea who she was, but in that moment, it didn't matter. All that mattered was keeping her calm. Keeping her safe outside, thunder rolled again. The planet's unstable weather was turning violent. He checked his wrist scanner. It showed incoming energy spikes. Maybe another storm, maybe worse. They had to move soon. Evan pointed to the exit and made walking gestures. The child hesitated and slowly nodded, still holding one of her toys, a small crystal cube glowing faintly blue. They moved together through the broken corridors. Evan kept scanning for safe paths. Twice he stopped to clear the way or lift fallen beams. The girl followed close behind, her tiny footsteps light on the dusty floor. Every time she looked scared, Evan would blow another bubble. It became their silent language, his way of saying it's okay. Unknown to him, a small royal observation drone hovered high above the ruins. Invisible in the smoke, it recorded everything: the human, the child, the strange act of kindness. A transmission beam connected it directly to a royal cruiser orbiting the planet. Inside the cruiser, guards watched the feed in silence. Their queen stood behind them, her eyes fixed on the human kneeling beside her daughter. "Who is he?" The Queen asked quietly. "An Earth engineer." "Majesty," said one of the officers. "He was part of the rescue unit. His ship went down near the royal sector." The Queen's eyes narrowed as she watched Evan protect the small girl from falling debris. Her lips curved into something between surprise and wonder. "He doesn't even know who she is," she whispered. "And yet he protects her like his own, down on the planet." Evan finally found a safe corner under an old dome. He sat the child down and checked his oxygen level again. It was dropping fast. He knew he had little time before he needed extraction. He opened a small packet of rations and offered her a bite. She sniffed it and smiled shyly before taking it. For the first time since the crash, Evan laughed softly. Maybe this wasn't just another rescue mission. He looked at her glowing eyes and said quietly, "We'll get out of here, kiddo. I promise." She didn't understand the words, but she nodded anyway, trusting the tone. Outside, the wind howled again, and distant engines roared in the sky. Something big was coming. Soldiers, maybe ships, maybe worse. Evan had no idea that his small act of kindness was being watched by the most powerful being in the galaxy, and that this one moment would change everything. The storm outside grew stronger. Lightning flashed across the broken sky, and the ruins shook again. Evan looked at the little alien girl sitting close to him, her small hands holding the glowing cube tightly. She was still scared, but the bubbles had made her calm for a while. Now the air was colder, and darkness started to fill the dome. Evan turned on his suit light and checked his wrist computer. The oxygen level was going down faster than before. He had to find a shelter with power soon. But the signal on his scanner showed no friendly ships nearby. Only strange moving dots, maybe drones, maybe patrols. He looked back at the girl. She didn't seem to understand his language, but her eyes followed his every move. He smiled a little, trying to look calm, even though he was not. "Don't worry, small one," he said softly. "We'll be okay." She tilted her head, not understanding the words, but she felt the kindness in his voice. To her, his tone sounded warm, a sound she had never heard from soldiers or guards before. Evan took off one of his gloves and reached out his bare hand slowly. The girl flinched at first, then touched his fingers. Her skin was cool and smooth, glowing faintly. A small spark of trust formed between them. He looked around the room, searching for something to keep her warm. He tore a part of his emergency blanket and wrapped it around her shoulders. She blinked, surprised by the gesture. Then she pointed to the broken toy at her feet and made a small sound. It was her way of saying thank you. Evan chuckled quietly. "Yeah, you're welcome, kid," he said, his voice gentle like a whisper. The storm hit again, and the building groaned. Dust fell from the ceiling. The child jumped and hugged his arm tightly. Evan held her close and spoke softly. "It's just thunder. It won't hurt you." He blew another bubble through the small wand. They floated and shined like tiny stars around them. Her wide eyes followed the colors, and she giggled again. For a moment, the fear disappeared, replaced by wonder. Outside, above the clouds, the Royal Observation Drone continued its silent watch. The live image showed the human and the air together in the broken shelter. Inside the royal cruiser, the Queen and her guards watched in silence. Her daughter, the future ruler of Virelia, was safe for now and guarded by a human she had never met. The Queen's voice was quiet but full of emotion. "This is the human who risked his life for my child," she said slowly. Her advisor nodded. "Yes, Majesty, he does not know her true identity." The Queen looked thoughtful, her eyes fixed on the screen. "Strange," she murmured. "In all our wars with humans, I have never seen one act like this." Back inside the ruins, Evan tried to make a plan. He needed to find a transmitter or beacon. The emergency line was broken, and his ship was far to the west. But he could carry the child and move once the storm slowed down. He gave her some water and let her rest for a bit. As she leaned against him, he felt the weight of her trust. It reminded him of his own little sister back on Earth, long gone since the first colony war. A wave of sadness crossed his mind, but he pushed it away. He couldn't show weakness. Not now. The girl looked at him again, her small voice whispering something in her language he didn't understand. But it sounded like friend, he smiled. Yeah, I guess we're friends now, he said quietly. Outside, thunder cracked again, and the ground vibrated. But this time, she didn't hide. She just watched him, believing he would keep her safe. Suddenly, his scanner beeped, movement nearby. Evan froze and turned off his light. Through the broken wall, he could see faint red lights moving in the dark. They weren't human. He pulled the girl closer and whispered, "Stay quiet, okay?" The red lights came closer, forming a line, alien search drones scanning the ruins. He realized they were searching for someone, maybe her. He crouched behind a metal beam, covering the girl. The drones floated above the debris, scanning for life signs. One of them hovered right above their hiding place. Evan held his breath, his hand over the girl's mouth to keep her quiet. The hum of the machine filled the air. Seconds felt like minutes. Finally, the drone moved away. Disappearing into the storm, Evan exhaled slowly. His body trembling from the tension, the child looked up at him with wide eyes. He gave a small smile and whispered, "We're okay." High above, the Queen watched this moment too. Her heart beat faster, fear and admiration mixing together. Her advisor said, "Majesty, should we send troops to extract her?" The Queen raised her hand slowly. "Not yet," she replied. "I want to see what the human does next." Back in the ruins, Evan sat again, his back against the cold wall. He looked at the girl sleeping beside him, peaceful now. He didn't know she was the heir to a galactic throne. To him, she was just a frightened child who needed help. And that was enough reason to fight for her. He looked at the last bubble floating in the air before it popped softly. "Humans aren't so bad, huh?" he whispered with a tired smile. Outside, lightning flashed once more, and far away, ships were descending through the storm. Something big was coming. But for now, in that small broken dome, a fragile peace lived between two worlds. The morning came with red light across the broken sky. The storm had finally passed, but the air was still thick with smoke and heat. Evan woke up slowly, his head resting against the cold wall. The little alien girl was still asleep beside him, holding the glowing cube close to her chest. For a moment, he forgot where he was. Then he saw the broken metal, the fire outside, and the ruined city, and it all came back. He checked his wrist computer again. No human signals nearby, no rescue ships, no response from command, only static. His oxygen levels were low, but not critical yet. He looked at the girl, then at the sky. "All right, kid," he whispered softly. "We need to move before someone finds us." The child woke up, blinking as the light hit her eyes. She looked weak, but calmer now. Evan offered her water, and she smiled a little before drinking. Her voice was soft when she said a few alien words. He didn't understand, but he answered with a nod and a smile. They stood up together and started walking through the remains of the city. The streets were covered in dust and fallen signs. Broken machines lay scattered everywhere. Every step echoed through the empty buildings. Evan's eyes moved constantly, scanning for movement. He could feel they were not alone. Something was watching, and he was right. In the distance, a patrol of alien soldiers moved slowly through the streets. Their armor glowed dark blue, and they carried plasma rifles. They were looking for someone, and Evan had no idea it was the girl beside him. One of the soldiers looked at a holographic image in his hand. It was the same child, her royal crest shining above the picture. "Find her alive," the captain ordered. "The queen demands her return." Back in the ruins, Evan heard a faint mechanical hum. He stopped and raised his hand. The girl froze, eyes wide with fear. He whispered, "Hide," and they crouched behind a half-collapsed wall. The sound grew louder, boots hitting the ground, metal armor clinking. Evan peeked through a crack and saw 3 soldiers scanning the area. His heart pounded. They were not humans, and their weapons looked deadly. He looked at the child, who was trembling again. He pressed a finger to his lips and mouthed, "Quiet." The soldiers stopped near the wrecked dome. One of them said something in their language, pointing at the ground. Another scanned with a device. It beeped, showing a faint life sign. Evan knew it was picking up them. He looked around, thinking fast. Then he grabbed a small piece of metal and threw it to the far side of the building. The noise echoed loudly. The soldiers turned instantly and aimed their rifles that way. Evan took the chance. He picked up the girl and ran. His boots hit the dirt quietly but fast. They slipped through a narrow gap between 2 walls, hearts racing. Behind them, one of the soldiers shouted, and blue light flashed through the smoke. Plasma blasts hit the wall near Evan, spraying dust and sparks. He ducked and covered the girl, rolling behind cover. "Stay down," he whispered urgently. The child clung to his arm, tears in her glowing eyes. Another blast hit nearby. Evan grabbed his small flare gun and shot it high into the sky. It wasn't a weapon, just a distress signal. But maybe, just maybe, someone would see it. Inside the royal cruiser above the planet, alarms beeped. The Queen's advisor turned to her. "Majesty, we've located the heir's signal. It matches the distress flare." The Queen stood quickly, her voice calm but sharp. "Send a recovery squad immediately," she ordered. The advisor hesitated. "But Majesty, there is a human with her." The Queen paused, then looked back at the screen, showing Evan shielding her daughter. "Then we bring them both," she said softly. "No harm to him." Back on the ground, Evan and the girl hid in an underground corridor. He leaned against the wall, breathing heavily. His shoulder burned. A small piece of metal had grazed him. The girl noticed and reached out, touching the cut gently. Her touch made his pain fade slightly, a strange energy flowing through his skin. Evan looked at her in surprise. "Okay." "That's new," he whispered with a weak smile. The girl gave a small laugh. The first since they started running. Above them, the sound of engines grew louder. The sky filled with the shadows of large ships descending. The soldiers looked up, confused. The Queen's royal insignia appeared on their visors. A voice commanded, "Stand down. Your queen has arrived." Evan didn't hear it. He only saw the bright light from the landing zone far away. He didn't know who was coming. He only knew he had to protect the girl. No matter what, he reloaded his flare gun. Even though it was useless, he was ready to fight if he had to. Then, through the broken ceiling, a beam of blue light appeared. A soft hum filled the air as a transport pod landed near them. Evan grabbed the girl's hand and pulled her behind a wall. The door of the pod opened. From the light stepped a tall figure in royal armor, elegant, shining with golden lines. The alien soldiers around them kneeled instantly, their heads bowed. Evan stared in shock. The little girl gasped and whispered one word, full of emotion, "Mother." Evan turned his head slowly, realizing who stood before them. The woman's eyes were calm but powerful, filled with both love and command. Evan lowered his weapon, confused. He didn't understand what was happening. But he knew one thing. This wasn't just a rescue anymore. It was something far bigger, something that would change everything between humans and this alien world. The Queen stepped closer, her gaze fixed on Evan, and with a soft but firm voice, she said, "You protected my daughter when no one else could." Evan didn't speak, only nodded slowly. The Queen's soldiers looked at each other in disbelief. A human, protecting the royal heir, this was the beginning of something no one had imagined. The blue light from the royal pod faded slowly. Dust and wind swirled around the landing zone as the tall figure stepped forward. Evan stood still, his body tense, his hand still holding the girl's small fingers. He had no idea who this armored figure was. But the soldiers were kneeling, and that meant only one thing, someone important. The woman's armor shimmered with golden threads that looked alive. Her eyes glowed softly under the visor, and her voice echoed like calm thunder. "Bring the human forward," she said. Her tone was not angry, not cold. It carried strength and quiet emotion. The soldiers looked uncertain. They had hunted humans before, but now their queen herself was giving the order to bring one unharmed. Evan hesitated. He didn't want to move. Not until he knew the girl was safe. The child tugged at his sleeve gently and looked up at him. She said something in her alien tongue. Only one word, but it was full of meaning. He didn't understand, but she smiled and nodded toward the Queen. Then she ran to the woman's side. Evan watched in shock as the Queen knelt down and wrapped her arms around the girl. The soldiers around them bowed lower. Evan's heart skipped. She's her mother, he realized. The Queen. This little one is her daughter. The Queen lifted her child's face, tears shining faintly in her eyes. "My star, you are safe," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly. The child spoke again, pointing back at Evan. The Queen turned her head and looked directly at him. For a long moment, no one spoke. Evan stood there, dust covering his suit, a cut across his cheek. He looked tired but calm. He had no weapon in hand, only his broken scanner and that small bubble wand in his pocket. The Queen stepped closer. Her soldiers raised their rifles slightly, but she raised her hand to stop them. Her eyes stayed on Evan as she said softly, "You protected my daughter, though you did not know who she was." Evan opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He simply nodded once. He didn't do it for reward or glory. He did it because it was the right thing to do. The Queen studied him quietly, then said, "Humans have fought us for decades, but I have never seen one show compassion like this." Evan took a slow breath, then replied, "War makes everyone afraid, but kindness doesn't need a side." The soldiers around them shifted uncomfortably. Hearing those words, the Queen blinked, surprised by his calm voice. Her daughter smiled, tugging her mother's sleeve and showing her the small bubble toy. She pressed the button, and tiny bubbles floated in the air again. The Queen's eyes widened slightly. Even through all the smoke and ruin, the bubbles glimmered like small stars. Her daughter laughed softly. "Human bubbles," she said proudly in her language. The Queen watched the scene and felt something deep inside her heart. Something she had not felt in years. Hope. Evan looked at them and smiled a little. "I think she likes those," he said quietly. The Queen didn't answer right away. She turned to her guards, her voice steady again. "Prepare the ship. We leave this place." Then she looked back at Evan. "You will come with us," she said. Not as an order, but as a decision that carried respect. Evan blinked in confusion. "With you?" he asked. The Queen nodded. "You saved the heir of Veralia. You will not be left here to die." He hesitated, thinking of what that meant. Leaving with aliens, being taken to their world. But then he looked at the child, who was holding his hand again and smiling up at him. He sighed softly and nodded. "All right then," he said with a small grin. "Let's go." They boarded the royal shuttle. Inside, everything was bright and clean. Glowing with soft blue light, the child sat beside him, playing with the bubbles again. The Queen stood near the front, watching silently. As the shuttle rose above the destroyed city, the view below looked haunting. Fires still burning. Ships crashed, silence everywhere. Evan felt a strange mix of sadness and relief. He didn't know what would happen next. But somehow, he trusted this feeling in the royal cruiser. The guards stepped aside as the queen entered with her daughter. Every soldier bowed deeply, whispering in awe. The air is safe. But when they saw the human walking beside her, they looked confused. The queen turned and said clearly, "This man saved the future of our empire. Treat him with honor." No one dared to argue. Evan stood quietly near the window, looking out at the stars. The vastness of space stretched endlessly, beautiful and cold. He wondered what people back on Earth would say if they knew he was on an alien royal ship. He smiled to himself. Life had a strange way of surprising him. The queen approached slowly, standing beside him. Her voice was softer now, almost human. "My daughter says you made her laugh during the storm." Evan chuckled lightly. "Just some bubbles," he said. "Sometimes small things help the most." The queen nodded, her eyes thoughtful. "In our empire, power means control and fear. But you showed her something different." Evan looked at her and replied, "Maybe that's what makes us human." The queen turned away, but there was a faint smile on her lips. For the first time in many years, she saw that peace might be possible. And it started not with weapons, but with kindness. The ship moved silently through the stars, carrying a new story, one that would be remembered across galaxies. A human's small act of compassion had touched the heart of a queen. And neither of them knew it yet, but this meeting would change the future of both worlds forever. The royal cruiser glided silently through the dark sea of stars. Evan stood near the observation window, his reflection glowing against the starlight. Behind him, the little alien child played with the bubble toy again, filling the royal chamber with soft colors and laughter. The queen watched her daughter and then turned her gaze toward the human who had risked everything for her heir. Days had passed since they left the ruined planet. Evan had learned some of their words, and the child had started learning a few human ones. She called him Evan, but when she smiled, it sounded like FN each time she spoke. The queen's heart warmed, something rare for a ruler who had carried centuries of war on her shoulders. The queen invited Evan to the royal deck. As he entered, two guards stepped aside and bowed slightly. He still wasn't used to that. He looked around the wide hall, tall glass walls showing the endless stars, banners of gold and blue waving gently in the air. The queen stood beside a circular map of galaxies, her voice calm but filled with emotion. "Human," she began, "your people and mine have spilled blood for too long." Evan stayed silent, listening carefully. "You saved my daughter without knowing who she was," the queen continued. "And you asked for nothing in return?" She turned to face him. "In my world, power is shown through fear. But you showed power through mercy." Evan nodded slowly. "Maybe that's what humanity is best at," he said quietly. "We break, but we still care." The queen's expression softened. "My advisors say I should not trust you," she said. "But I saw what you did. I saw how you risked your life for my child. I will not forget that." At that moment, her daughter ran into the hall, holding a small crystal cube that glowed brightly. "Mother, look," she said in her gentle voice. "I made this for Evan." She handed it to him. Inside the cube, tiny lights danced like stars, forming the image of a human and an alien child standing together. Evan smiled, speechless for a second. "Thank you, little one," he said softly, his voice full of emotion. The queen placed her hand on her daughter's head and looked at him again. "You are now a friend of the throne," she declared, "and a symbol of peace between our worlds." The hall filled with whispers, the guards looking at each other in surprise. A human, once seen as an enemy, now honored by the queen herself. Evan felt awkward but proud. He looked at the queen and said, "If my people ever meet yours again, I hope they remember this moment. Not the wars, The Queen nodded. They will, she said quietly. I will make sure of it, later. As the cruiser approached a massive city floating in space, the Queen prepared a public message. Her words would be broadcast to every colony and every world in her empire. Evan watched from the side as she stood before 1,000 glowing lenses. When the signal went live, her voice echoed across the stars. Today, she said, a human saved the life of my daughter, the heir to the Varelian Empire. The crowd across worlds gasped. He asked for nothing, yet gave everything, she continued. From this day forward, humanity will no longer be our enemy, but our ally. Cheers erupted across planets. For the first time in centuries, the word human was spoken with respect. Evan stood quietly as the Queen finished her speech. The little girl ran to him and hugged his leg tightly. Smiling, "Evan, no more war," she said in broken English. He knelt down, smiling back. "Yeah," he whispered. "No more war." In the days that followed, humans and aliens began to speak again. Ships of both sides met not for battle, but for rebuilding the broken worlds. Evan helped design shelters and shared human tools. In return, the aliens shared medicine and energy systems. The alliance grew, built not on fear, but on trust. And every time someone asked how it all began, the Queen would tell the story. Peace started with bubbles, she would say with a small smile, and the kindness of one human. Years later, on the anniversary of that day, a statue stood in the center of the royal capital. It showed a human kneeling beside a small alien child, both reaching toward the same light. At the base were words engraved in 2 languages. He calmed the air with kindness and changed the stars forever. Visitors from every corner of the galaxy came to see it. Children played around the statue, blowing bubbles just like in the story. Some laughed, some looked up at the stars and whispered the name. Evan Cole, the human who calmed the air on that day. The Queen and her daughter stood quietly before the monument. The Queen spoke softly. He didn't just save my child. He saved our future. Her daughter smiled and blew a bubble that drifted into the sky. It floated high, glowing with the light of 2 suns. And as it disappeared into the endless blue, the Queen whispered the words that echoed through time. May kindness always lead the strong, somewhere far away. On a quiet human outpost, an older Evan sat watching the stars. He didn't wear armor or medals, just a small pendant shaped like the cube the child had given him. He smiled when he saw a bubble float by, one that escaped from a nearby children's game. He laughed softly, shaking his head. Still works every time, he said to himself, and as the stars shimmered above, he whispered with pride, humans were not perfect, but we try. The wind moved softly across the sky station as lights flickered across galaxies. Peace was fragile, but alive, and it all began with a simple act of kindness from one human who refused to walk away. Evan Cole, the man who calmed the alien air, had left behind something stronger than fear. He left behind a legacy of hope.